On this Sunday night, exploding wildfires engulfing Canada. Alberta on edge as towering flames inch closer to town.
To break records year after year after year, I believe speaks quite loudly.
How a firefighting staff shortage is sparking concern for the season ahead. Security tight as Trump's base rolls into town. We're in Miami ahead of the former U.S. president's court appearance. What Trump wants from his supporters. The Airbnb effect on affordable housing.
People have been evicted, and then the landlord puts these places on Airbnb, makes, double or triple.
And what were you doing at 12?
Hi, my name is Anthea Grace Patricia Dennis. I'm a student in the Honours Bachelor's in Biomedical Science.
Meet Canada's youngest university grad.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us tonight. We begin with those raging wildfires burning across Canada, but especially in Alberta, where the return of hot and dry conditions has caused the situation to spiral. One of the worst affected areas is the town of Edson, west of Edmonton. The fire inching closer and closer to the community has been labeled a beast by the town's mayor, and it's exploded in size, growing 55% in just 24 hours. This phone video shows one resident's daring escape. Towering flames are less than 2 kilometers away from homes, forcing people to flee for the second time in just a month. There are more than 75 wildfires in Alberta, and approximately a third of them are out of control. And more than 11,000 people across that province are now displaced. Erica Vella has our top story tonight.
Communities in Alberta struggling to cope as wildfires inch closer.
It's like you're on edge, like you can't even sleep sometimes because you're wondering what's next.
In parts of Proskow County, an evacuation alert has been issued. Residents must be prepared to leave their homes on 30 minutes notice.
The smoke was so thick, like literally you had trouble breathing.
There are 77 active wildfires in Alberta, and in Quebec,
we have 131 wildfires active.
The province taking an offensive approach with help from reinforcements, but it's still not safe for evacuees to return home.
We have discussion with those communities, and when it's going to be safe enough, they will be able to go back.
This is absolutely an unprecedented season. Things started early in all parts of Canada.
There are over 400 active fires burning across the country, more than 200 of them considered out of control.
We have 4.7 million hectares that have been burnt already in the country.
With the early start to the wildfire season, experts say it will have detrimental impacts on wildlife.
I expect a lot of species are losing their reproduction for the year, that all the birds that are nesting right now, things like snowshoe hares that have their first litter of offspring right now, those babies will not be able to escape from the fires.
Hodges says it's likely the fires will cause wildlife populations to decline.
Some will die, some loss of reproduction this year. The others will be displaced. I'm especially concerned for threatened and endangered species that rely on these mature forests. And if we are losing habitat for them now, that's going to make maintenance and then recovery for these populations and species more difficult.
Work is underway to suppress the fires across the nation, but with the end of wildfire season still months away, many are hoping Mother Nature will bring a welcome reprieve.
What we need some rain, we need it yesterday.
Erica Vella, Global News, Toronto.
Across the border in BC, cooler conditions and shifting winds are helping fire crews gain the upper hand in the community of Tumbler Ridge. About 2,400 people living in the mining town were told to leave on Thursday last week. Rumina Daya is in Tumbler Ridge for us tonight. Rumina.
Farah, Tumbler Ridge is still standing, but it's a ghost town. Ribbons on houses, confirmation residents have evacuated. While it's blue skies here today and the winds are calmer, the fire threat is still very real. The fire is roughly 4 kilometers away from Tumbler Ridge. Slightly cooler temperatures and a shift in the wind away from town is giving frontline firefighters time to lay fire breaks and pound the forest with water. This plan of attack is expected to continue today as long as the weather holds.
We're doing everything in our power to keep this fire from reaching their community.
2,400 residents were ordered to leave their homes Thursday after the fire blew up, but many have refused to go. Marcel Brodeur, a former firefighter, keeping watch over his community and sending updates to worried friends. Brodeur laser focused on the ridge line behind his home. You can't see it, but the fire is raging on the other side.
Right now, we're looking really good, and yeah, I think I got a feeling we're going to be okay.
Anxious residents are wondering when or if they'll be able to return home. The evacuation order still stands. However, the district is issuing temporary entry passes for legitimate reasons. For example, if you have livestock to feed or other essential services. Farah.
Rumina Daya in Tumbler Ridge, BC. Thanks for your coverage tonight. Now we go to the U.S., where Donald Trump is preparing for his arraignment in Miami on Tuesday as the first former president to be federally indicted. He faces dozens of severe charges for over 100 classified national security files he allegedly kept after leaving office. Despite damning evidence, supporters in Florida are still rallying behind Trump, who's long called the investigation a witch hunt and remains committed to his campaign to retake the presidency in the 2024 election. Our Jackson Proskow is in Miami with more on the preparations ahead of Tuesday, and he joins us now from there. Jackson, what can we expect?
Farah, Donald Trump has called on his supporters to rally outside the courthouse here in Miami on Tuesday to protest what he calls the boxes hoax. But the fact is, the indictment unsealed by special counsel Jack Smith on Friday is deadly serious and poses significant legal peril for the former president. Those boxes of classified documents recovered from Trump's Florida home allegedly contained U.S. nuclear secrets and intelligence on foreign nations. Some of the documents are so sensitive that their level of classification is actually classified itself. Trump returned to the campaign trail on Saturday, where he railed against the special counsel and the Justice Department, claiming the whole investigation is politically motivated. But if you want a sense of how high the legal stakes are, just take a listen to Trump's former Attorney General, Bill Barr, a longtime defender of Trump in many other investigations.
If even half of it is true, then he's toast. I mean, it's a very detailed indictment, and it's very, very damning. And this idea of presenting Trump as a victim here, a victim of a witch hunt, is ridiculous.
Now, much like we saw in New York when Trump was indicted on state-level charges, security outside the courthouse remains a real concern. Except here, there's an added element because Florida is very much Trump country. It's much easier for his supporters to get here and make their voices heard. Some of Trump's political allies are going even further, and they're essentially calling for violence or in some cases even civil war. That being said, the Secret Service says no extra precautions are being taken for Trump's visit. It's expected he'll turn himself over to the U.S. Marshals for processing ahead of his arraignment on Tuesday afternoon. Farah?
Jackson Proskow in Miami for us. Thanks, Jackson. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is on his way home after Saturday's surprise visit to Ukraine, where he and Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland met with President Volodymyr Zelensky, announcing more money to help the people of Ukraine. According to the United Nations, there have been more than 23,000 civilian casualties in Ukraine since Russia invaded. Off that number, more than 8,000 have been killed and nearly 15,000 injured. And now we're learning that Russian forces actually fired at rescue boats in the wake of that devastating dam collapse and major flooding, killing 3 people. But tonight, as Redmond Shannon reports, Ukraine says it's gaining ground in a new counteroffensive, claiming to have retaken a village occupied by Russia.
In a war where the two sides dispute the most basic of facts, prisoner swaps somehow continue to happen. Almost 100 Russians freed by Ukraine Sunday, with a similar number of Ukrainian troops heading home in the opposite direction. One other rare area of agreement is that both sides say the floodwaters are now receding somewhat. Although there the consensus ends. Kyiv and Moscow accuse each other of blowing up the Kakhovka Dam. The Ukrainian governor of Kherson claims Russian troops fired at 3 boats of evacuees, killing 3 people and injuring more. Such dangers in a war zone weighed up against the ongoing risk of disease, the water unsafe to drink for humans and animals. Conservationist Katerina Filuta says it could take years or decades for some ecosystems to recover.
The consequences will be for our children or grandchildren, just as we are the ones now experiencing the consequences of the Chernobyl disaster.
To the east, Ukraine claims its counteroffensive has liberated a village in the southern Donbass. It would be the first settlement retaken since President Volodymyr Zelensky signalled the start of the much-anticipated operation during Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's visit on Saturday. Moscow, meanwhile, is just as eager to trumpet battle victories. Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu decorating soldiers for the Kremlin's claims of taking out some of Ukraine's German and US-made tanks. Russia also says it foiled an attempted attack on a Black Sea Navy vessel by amphibious drones. The information war rages on beside the real one, with little end in sight to either. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Firefighter shortage at the worst time. Coming up, the alarming reality around retention and recruitment across Canada. Returning to our wildfire coverage now. Given the fact that Canada's on track to record the most severe wildfire season ever seen, it's all hands on deck right now. But it's an uphill battle because despite hundreds of personnel from other countries lending a helping hand, a shortage of firefighters across this country is raising concern for the rest of the season. And as Joe Scarpelli reports, the burning question is, does Canada have enough people to keep communities safe going forward?
Months before wildfire season started, the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs warned of a concerning trend. The number of both career and volunteer firefighters is going down. Ken McMullen is the president of the association.
There's definitely a shortfall. There's no doubt about it.
Canada is burning through hundreds of thousands of kilometers of land every day, nearly 5 million hectares so far this year. McMullen says Canada is battling the fires with 30,000 fewer firefighters than there were in the year of the Fort McMurray wildfire.
You think about that amount of work that we're doing today. You think about all of the fires that are in our communities today. We're tackling those with 30,000 less today than we did in 2016. That's a significant issue.
Roughly 70% of Canadian firefighters are volunteers. Most of them have other jobs, making it difficult to strike a balance when dealing with lengthy fire events.
If you have wildfire impacting your community, it is 24/7 for weeks, if not days, if not weeks on end, where people need to be there and doing that work.
Amid calls for better training and increased tax incentives for volunteers, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Canada has enough resources to cover the summer, but the government is developing contingency plans if things get worse. But some are already coming up with their own long-term contingency plans. Take Balgonie, Saskatchewan, for example, where the aging volunteer fire department, like so many others, is looking for young blood. Young blood that may seem less inclined to gear up.
We run what's called a junior firefighter program. We bring kids in ranging from as young as 14 years old. Hopefully we get them hooked at a young age. Then when they turn 18, we can actually start utilizing the young ones.
Despite some success, the chief admits the firefighting industry needs a lot more attention, not just in his town, but in communities across the country. Joe Scarpelli, Global News.
Ahead, the ripple effects of Airbnb, how short-term rentals are squeezing out long-term residents. If you're planning summer travel, you've probably noticed that the cost of hotels has gone through the roof this year. And it's prompted many people to look at more affordable options like Airbnbs. Now, the industry has come roaring back after taking a backseat during the pandemic. But it's one of many factors contributing to the current housing crisis. Ann Gaviola has more on what's being labeled the Airbnb effect.
With a return of travel comes the return of demand for Airbnbs, pulling thousands of units from the long-term rental market into short-term rentals, squeezing already unaffordable cities like Toronto and Vancouver.
The empirical evidence is very clear that both before the pandemic and now after the pandemic, that short-term rentals are playing a major role in making housing less affordable.
People have been evicted, and then the landlord puts these places on Airbnb, makes, double or triple the amount of money a month than they did renting to a long-term tenant.
There are rules in Canada's two most expensive cities to crack down on so-called superhosts who own multiple units and rent them on home-sharing platforms, siphoning housing stock for profit. Data firm AirDNA says regulation has made a difference.
Most people respect the law, and as a result, when you enact these regulations, it really slows the growth in listings.
And Airbnb tells Global News it works closely with policymakers to ensure rules are followed. The San Francisco-based company says most of its users are renting space within their home to help make ends meet.
In Canada, 53% of our hosts say they use income from hosting to cover the cost of living. 47% say it's helped them stay in their homes.
And yet, the data shows that there are ways to get around laws. A fire in Montreal in March killed 7 people. 6 were staying in illegal Airbnb units, prompting the province of Quebec to look at imposing tough new rules on home-sharing platforms that come with financial penalties.
Hopefully, it will set an example, for other jurisdictions across Canada, so that a tragedy like this won't repeat itself.
And as long as there's a lot of money to be made, people are going to be really incentivized to figure out ways to make that money. And that means that governments need to act, strongly.
Airbnb isn't the only factor juicing housing affordability, but it's an easy target for lawmakers. Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
We meet the youngest Canadian to get a university degree. Her extraordinary journey next. Right now, in almost every province, crews are working to put out wildfires that threaten communities, while smoke creates dystopian scenes far from the front lines. On Friday, I had a conversation with the forestry and climate change expert, Dr. Patrick James, in Toronto's High Park. We talked about what's fueling these fires and the future of Canadian forests. Dr. James, we've had wildfires before, especially in Western Canada, but these fires are hotter. The smoke is going higher into the atmosphere. Is this linked to climate change?
I would say most definitely. There's a consequence of climate change on our weather patterns, including temperature, pressure, precipitation. We've had the 3rd warmest May on record. There are some exceptional temperatures in the ocean, which lead to these higher temperatures and more energy in the system. And in general, fires are the result of the interactions between fuels, ignitions, and weather. And so we've had these incredibly dry, hot conditions. The fuels are very dry. And then with sources of ignitions from things like thunderstorms, we get that confluence of factors that are resulting in these huge clusters of very damaging fires.
It is a spring wildfire season, though. So is that rare to see this during the spring? I mean, I guess most of the provinces in Canada are on fire right now, right?
Yeah, it is unusual to have this much fire activity this early in the season. I believe Quebec has exceeded its recent records in area burned, and it's only within June. And this is the consequence of these really warm, dry weeks we've had. In the spring, before the vegetation has leafed out in the forest, there's just very dry conditions. Vegetation holds water. Vegetation on the landscape can temper the effects of a fire, but in the spring, before that happens, these fuels are dry and very, very susceptible to fire.
How do we prevent a Slave Lake or Fort McMurray when we're seeing these fires?
Right. It's a difficult question. I'd say investment in emergency preparedness, education. There are some options involving fuel mitigation around communities or resources. So I think, thinking about this through the lens of climate change and our obligations to reduce atmospheric CO2 concentrations, and realizing that there is this direct link between carbon dioxide emissions and temperature and heat, and of course the wildfire regimes.
Is this our new reality?
Yeah, I think a lot of people would say so. We continue to have record-breaking years in terms of both fire and weather. So, and it doesn't seem like it's just a one-off, right? So,
seems like an aha moment right now.
Well, yeah, I'd say so, and I would hope people would realize that this is the new norm. These extremes are the new normal. If you were to just have one extreme year every once in a while, we could attribute that to variation, natural variation and chance. But to break records year after year after year, I believe speaks quite loudly. And I think we need to brace ourselves for more extreme fire weather, mega fires than fewer.
When we look at these plants and this vegetation, I mean, it has been here for eons. What are the long-term effects of these type of wildfires?
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting question. The trees, the forests, they have an evolutionary history of dealing with fire. And so a really interesting question is, are these fires happening in such a way with such a severity that they may exceed the capacity of these systems to recover? And so are we going to see expected regeneration trajectories? Are we going to see wildlife able to respond to these? And so, I mean, this is this link between climate change and disturbances, wildlife, forest regeneration, this sort of complexity that we try to address, and it's not a simple answer.
All right, Dr. Patrick James, thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you very much.
There are fictional sitcoms about kids like Anthea Grace Patricia Dennis here, Doogie Howser, young Sheldon, but this is real life. Anthea completed kindergarten at the age of 2. She started university at 9, and last night she graduated.
Hi, my name is Anthea Grace Patricia Dennis. I'm a student in the Honors Bachelor's in Biomedical Science, but my research area is in neuroscience.
Anthea, wise beyond her years, is just 12 years old. Here's a photo of the preteen grad crossing the stage at the University of Ottawa last night. In fact, she's the youngest Canadian ever to graduate from a university, in biomedical science, no less. Anthea completed a 40-page thesis about the relationship between the brain and the hand for right versus left-handed people. And the best part, she's not done yet. She plans to pursue a postgraduate degree after the summer break. Congratulations to you, Anthea, and we can't wait to follow your journey. Hope you get to rest during the summer. That's Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Farah Nasser. Thanks for spending part of your evening with us. Tonight's Your Canada is Bracebridge, Ontario. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Good night.